Now, I absolutely adore my Range Rover. In fact, I think I have a mental disorder that causes me to keep wanting to buy more. I was going to open the hood for this next point, talking about the engines, mainly the timing chain. But the struts holding my hood up have decided they didn't want to work anymore. So we're going to do it like this. The Range Rover name is infamous for being related to both mechanical and electrical faults, and in fact, if you own any Range Rover, you understand the condescending tone people have when they ask you what it's like to own. So here today I am to talk about all of these things that the condescending Accord drivers talk about when they ask us what it's like to own, by going over the 5 common faults with the L322 Range Rover. Now, one thing I do want to point out before we even jump in is that the L322 was produced for 10 years for the model lineup, so with that they have all different transmissions, engines, and electrics inside. Everything throughout those 10 years changed pretty much, and this, a later generation, is nearly completely different than the first generation of the L322. So these are common problems that are spread all throughout of the entire 10-year production, not just one specific generation or model year. So one of the most common faults with the Range Rover, and I'm not talking about the owners, is this: the air suspension. The air suspension for years has been known to collapse over time due to faulty air struts or springs, compressors, or even height sensors. Possibly though, one of the most annoying parts about air suspension faults is you really never know what it is unless you have a code scanner. So with that, it could be a height sensor, it could be the compressor, or it could be the air struts. Really, there are so many different things with the air suspension that can fail that it's really hard to keep up. So with that, I have this little thing right here. This is automatic. You plug it in down there, connect it to your phone through Bluetooth. Over time, everything syncs, all of the fault codes come up, pull up on your phone, and it's pretty cheap and simple. Now, you obviously can have much nicer code scanners and ones that can do way more than this thing can, but for the price, for everything that it does, I prefer this thing. It just sits up in there. That's what she said. So you can find an automatic down in the link below through an Amazon affiliate link. Air suspension is one of the most complicated suspension setups that you can have, especially when you make it adjustable like Land Rover do in all of their models. The problem with that comes when you realize that something that's over-engineered is almost always designed to fail. And they do. Okay, there we go. Suspension fault. Transmission issues are also pretty common through L322 Range Rovers, although Land Rover did try to supplement the transmission issues by saying they need to be serviced at certain intervals, as well as putting new gearboxes in the cars entirely. If not serviced correctly and kept up with over time, they are pretty prone to failure, which at that point, it's not really a fault of the car, it's more of a fault of you. Early signs of transmission failure in the L322 include a hesitation to shift, as well as some warning lights on the dashboard. The L322 was designed to shift and perform without hesitation and be an entirely smooth experience, so over time when they start experiencing a little hesitation before shifting up or down, it can be early signs of transmission failure. Now, there are some things you can do at that point. You can service the transmission, and a lot of the times that will work out a lot of the kinks in the shifting. However, that's not going to 100% prevent it from failing if it gets past the point of no return. Now, I'm pretty fond of this one. I've never experienced it, but a lot of L322s over time do start to have a faulty fuel gauge sensor. Now, I find this one funny because the Range Rover knows that its big V8 is just so bad on fuel that it doesn't even want to tell you how much is left in it. That's character. Now, obviously, not knowing where your fuel sits in your Range Rover is going to be one of the most annoying things about it. It's not going to completely stop the car from running, probably, but it's also going to be incredibly annoying to constantly monitor your MPG to try to figure out how much fuel you have left based on how much you've driven. But on top of that, I've seen a number of people complaining about their Range Rover running out of fuel when it's still showing a quarter of a tank left on the screen. And that causes an issue. In the owner's handbook right here, it even says, never allow the vehicle to run out of fuel. The resulting misfire could damage the catalyst. Now, I don't know what that means, but it sounds expensive. Now, I hesitated a little bit to put the suspension bushings as well as the front lower control arms on this list because it is kind of like brakes. It is expected to wear down over time. Let's be honest, the L322 weighs about the same as San Francisco, so both of them over time are going to have trouble supporting each other. I don't even think you can drive these in San Francisco. So it's hard to completely put the Range Rover at fault, considering it is something that is expected to wear out over time. However, it is actually something that you have to replace if you drive it a lot. Typically, you'll start to notice a clunking or chattering noise as the car drives over a bump, and you'll also start to notice the car becoming out of alignment and then unevenly wearing out the tires. This happened to me last year. I actually bought the car with worn out front lower control arms, and then after that, drove it for a year. It's not something I would recommend doing, it's not something you should do, but I did it. But it happened, and even though you shouldn't do it, I've always been in the mindset that if you leave one thing broken, nothing else will break, although that didn't prove true with the fuel injectors and the spark plugs. Now, I absolutely adore my Range Rover. In fact, I think I have a mental disorder that causes me to keep wanting to buy more. But with that, I was going to open the hood for this next point, talking about the engines, mainly the timing chain. But the struts holding my hood up have decided they didn't want to work anymore, so we're going to do it like this. I could do an entire video talking about all of the different engine problems throughout the years of the L322. In fact, maybe the Accord owners actually do have a point. Pretty much every L322 had an engine in it at some point that had a problem. From Vanos issues in the early L322s to timing chain issues in the later L322s, you really get to pick your poison. Or don't open your hood at all. Seems to work for me. Now, the 4.4 V8 from Jaguar that they used from 2006 to 2009 had some timing chain issues occasionally. But from 2010 to 2012, the L322 experienced its biggest timing chain issues ever. If you own a 2010 to 2012 L322, odds are at some point you will have to do the timing chain service. It's like any timing chain, eventually the guides wear out and it's a $5,000 service to get that fixed. Now, not every timing chain costs that much to fix, but when you've got that badge on the front, that's what it is. Why do I do this to myself? Early signs of the timing chain going include a knocking or thumping in the engine bay. You'll start to hear like it's just politely knocking on the door, letting you know, hey, it's time to replace me. At least it's nice about it. Supercharged models typically need to have their timing chains replaced a little earlier on than naturally aspirated V8 models, but inevitably, if you own one of these with the 5-liter Jaguar V8s, at some point you will probably need to do the timing chain. I'm saving. And while most of these problems may seem like a wallet crusher, and I really didn't even get started even talking about the steering column, and that the Accord owners actually might be right, we love what we love, and most of these problems can actually be fixed yourself with some tools and maybe a lift. But I love mine, so I'm gonna keep doing it. It's a disease. I'm gonna walk home, I don't want to put miles on it.